Today's thought is taken from Paul's letter to the Ephesians, chapter 2. I'm going to read verses 1 to 10 to begin. As for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sins, in which you used to live when you followed the ways of this world and of the ruler of the kingdom of the air, the Spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient. All of us also lived among them at one time, gratifying the cravings of our sinful nature and following its desires and thoughts. Like the rest, we were by nature objects of wrath. But because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ, even when we were dead in transgressions. It is by grace you have been saved. And God raised us up with Christ and seated us with him in the heavenly realms in Christ Jesus, in order that in the coming ages he might show the incomparable riches of his grace, expressed in his kindness to us in Christ Jesus. For it is by grace you have been saved, through faith, and this not from yourselves. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. For we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. Paul begins his address to the Ephesians with a flat assertion. You were dead, verse 1. And he feels strongly enough about it to repeat it. We were dead, in verse 4. None of those listening to Paul's words or reading them for themselves had expired at the time of listening or reading. All of them were, in fact, still breathing. But his assertion is correct. Those under a sentence of death are as good as dead. And Paul declares that we were objects of wrath. Verse 4. He extends the application of his message from the Ephesians. All of us, verse 3, includes himself. And again in verse 3, like the rest, extends the application of his message to include those who have not yet heard. He tells us that this is how matters stood in the past. You were, we were. But matters have changed. God made us alive, verse 4. God raised us up, verse 6. And God seated us with him, verse 6 again. The news is good. You have been saved, verse 5. And again, verse 8. You have been saved. All of the remedial action has been taken by God, and none of it is deserved. It is by grace, verse 5. It is by grace, verse 8. It is the gift of God, verse 8 again. None of the remedial action has been taken by man. Verse 4. We were dead. Verse 8. Not from yourselves. Verse 9. Not by works. Paul wants us to appreciate that left to ourselves, our situation was hopeless. We could not help ourselves. We were by nature objects of wrath. Verse 4. As evidenced by our lifestyle preferences. And therefore we were good as dead. we owe our amended position to God. Verse 10, we are God's workmanship. He did not need my help when he formed me in the womb, and he did not need our help when he raised us up with Christ. We have been created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. Let us thank God that we have been saved not by works, but as God's workmanship.